Hello, and welcome back to ageofeliah.com. I want to begin in Romans chapter 3, verse 20, where it tells us, "Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall be no flesh justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin." Now, the word deeds here is the same word translated as works throughout Galatians chapter 2, verse 16, which also tells us that for by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. Why this phrase, works of the law, deeds of the law, why there are two different translations of the same phrase, we can only speculate. Now, viewing these verses from the Christian perspective that the law is done away with or suspended creates notable contradictions throughout the scriptures. If all scripture is truth, and we believe that it is, then we cannot accept some parts of it and disregard others. We can only change our personal doctrine so that it conforms to that of Scripture. Now, note Romans chapter 2, verse 13, which tells us, "For not the hearers of the law are just before Elohim, but the doers of the law shall be justified." That's a direct contradiction of the previous verses that I cited. Now, how do we reconcile this contradiction? One says, "Doers of the law shall be justified," and another one says, "For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified." Now, tell me that's not a direct contradiction. There is absolutely no way that this contradiction can be reconciled from the Christian perspective that the law is done away with. Let's take a look at Romans chapter 2, verse 12. "For as many as have sinned without law shall perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law." Now, I want to take this a little bit further to make a point. So I'd like you to look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 27, where Yeshua says, "For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works." Now, a judgment must be made in order to determine what reward is given. So we can be judged by the law or perish without it. Now, if we're judged by the law, our actions must be based in the law. I don't think there's a Christian on the planet that will argue with me that we will all be judged by the law. It's a straight statement out of Scripture, and they all believe that. But yet, they keep telling me that they are not subject to the law. Now, the word works in Matthew 16:27 is translated from the Greek word praxis, which means practice. Praxis comes from the Greek word praso, which means perform repeatedly or habitually. So we will be judged by our repeated performance of the Mosaic law and receive a reward accordingly, or we will perish without the law. Now, to further illustrate this point, let's take a look at Matthew chapter 13, verse 41, in which Yeshua states, "The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity." Now, I have brought this up many times before. The word iniquity is translated from the Greek word anomia, and it means illegality, violation of law, transgression of the law. Now, John told us that sin is the transgression of the law, and we are told not to sin. Now, the word anomia comes from the word anomos, and that means lawless, not subject to the law, without law, transgressor. Once again, not subject to the law. I hear this from my Christian friends all the time. I'm no longer subject to the law. Now, here we see, though, that Yeshua's words support Romans chapter 2, verse 12. For as many as have sinned without law should perish without law. So if he removes all those that do iniquity, which violate the law, transgress the law, believe they're not subject to the law, then obviously they're going to perish. So sadly, the contradiction between Romans 3:20 and Romans 2:13 will remain until one accepts the fact that there are two separate bodies of law, two separate and distinct bodies of law at issue in the New Testament writings. The first is, of course, the law given to Moses directly by the Almighty. And the second is the man-made law of the Pharisees, which Yeshua consistently challenged. Now, the phrase works of the law, and I am not going to argue this point with you folks. I just won't do it. It's easy to substantiate this as a fact, so I'm not going to argue this with you. The phrase works of the law is a direct reference to the man-made law of the Pharisees. It is a direct reference to a principle of the Talmud, the commandments of men, which is also the commandments of our rabbis, mitzvot darabanan. Now, I've explained this in the full video Doctrine and Tradition, which you can find at our YouTube site or at ageofeliah.com. Now, many people are going to claim that they are only subject to the law of Christ, based on the one and only mention of this phrase in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, where it states, "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Now, this is based on John chapter 13, verse 34, where Yeshua said, "A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you." Now, this new commandment is in addition to the commandments that Yeshua supported and lived by, in opposition to the man-made law of the Pharisees. The commandments that Yeshua supported and lived by were those given to Moses. Now, all one need to do is to read Yeshua's words during his confrontations with the Pharisees to see this truth. Now, Matthew chapter 15, verse 3 is just one such example. Now, the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, not one of them gives us any indication that Yeshua came to do away with or suspend the law given to Moses. Yeshua stated plainly that his doctrine is not his own, but it is the doctrine of he that sent him. This being the case, then no man can ascribe to Yeshua any new form of doctrine, and must accept that his doctrine was the doctrine found in the law given to Moses. Now, not many people are going to accept what I present in my videos, regardless of the fact that it comes directly from Scripture, and those things outside of Scripture are substantiated facts. Accept, reject, it's all a choice. It all depends on the grace that's been given to you. I'd like to leave you with this one last thought, and that is that our personal doctrine, regardless of what it is, it must conform to Scripture, and it cannot in any way cause a contradiction. I thank you for joining me. Shalom.